The concept of adventure in video games is pretty flexible, leading to countless variations that have created genre-defining differences. Near the pinnacle of the genre's early explorations, especially from Japan, is Dragon Quest. If you've played any RPG, Dragon Quest's influence is in there somewhere, though the original classic releases are where these elements are most clearly seen. In the midst of our seemingly endless wait for the elusive Dragon Quest XII, we now have an ideal opportunity to dive back into the series' roots with Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake. However, this release has also been highly anticipated since its initial announcement about 3 years ago, giving the project some rather lofty expectations from diehard fans and prospective newcomers alike. Now, after experiencing this revisit in full, it's more evident than ever that Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is not going to be for everyone, for better or for worse.
Well met, traveler. Tell me, what brings you to fairest Roma?
Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake stars a silent, nameable protagonist who forms a faceless party of 4 to stop the ambitions of the arch-filled Baramos. This quest is also personal, since the main character's father, Ortega, seemingly died on the same journey years ago. This narrative premise does most of the heavy lifting for Dragon Quest III. And there isn't much that goes on beyond that, even from a character perspective. At most, this remake features additional scenes and context for Ortega, emphasizing how significant his legacy is to countless people worldwide. Still, the relative brevity and lightness of the story has remained intact. For that reason alone, this adventure might not appeal to everyone. At its core, Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is an aesthetically pleasing facelift of this classic that keeps the spirit of the original game, but there are notable gameplay alterations. For instance, backtracking has been entirely remedied. The learnable Zoom spell and Chimera Wing item now function like an evac spell, meaning you can teleport between central locations anytime you wish. This also works in interiors, which in earlier games would prevent Zoom from working if there was a ceiling overhead. However, that doesn't mean that exploration has been reduced. In fact, I'd argue it's the complete opposite. The world map in this entry expands upon its foundations, with countless secret areas and collectibles strewn about. You have more incentive than ever to explore the world map at your leisure, and it's practically always worthwhile. The secret areas, identified by geography that stands out compared to the other surroundings, contain treasure and recruitable monsters. Yet, the other side of this coin can't be ignored. Also a carryover from the versions of Dragon Quest III is the high encounter rate. Unlike modern turn-based games, encounters here are entirely random, and the rate at which you encounter them is persistent. Regardless of where you are, be it on the world map or in a dungeon, every handful of steps will result in a battle. Even with one of the learnable spells that mitigates this encounter rate in weaker areas, it only somewhat helps with backtracking, and even then, its effects are moderate at best. This design choice is another major factor that may divide prospective players, and I'm kinda mixed on it myself. Personally, I think the rapid encounter rate, especially on the world map, highlights the significance of the progress you make during exploration, with each landmark feeling like a memorable step forward. It also emphasizes the sheer scale of the world you're traversing, ensuring that reaching distant locations takes commitment. That said, you can successfully flee from fights pretty often, and in the late game, the almost comical rate at which I ran into battles grew tiresome. It quickly became a cycle of encountering enemies, fleeing, and repeating the process for minutes on end. Thankfully, you can easily run away from fights by holding down one of the face buttons, but that feels more like a band-aid afterthought. Granted, I suppose the experience would be less frustrating in smaller doses than going through the whole journey in a few sittings. Let's circle back to what the general gameplay loop involves though. Forming a party is your first task, and it's crucial, though reversible. In the starting town, you can either take the default party the game builds for you, composed of what they deem the essential jobs, or you can create your own party members yourself. Of course, these characters are all silent, except for a certain puff-puff scenario, so you're really only focusing on the gameplay aspects, voices, and sprites. The jobs are at the core of Dragon Quest III's progression, and despite the minimal number, each boasts significant individuality. For example, you have have the mage and priest, magic-centric jobs that focus on spells of various kinds, as well as the trademark thief that can steal items during battle. In contrast, the main character has a fixed hero class, which is more of an all-rounder, making them a fit for basically any desired party step. Furthermore, this remake features the newly added Monster Wrangler job, which is also an all-rounder of sorts. Users of this job gain access to various skill types, with more learned depending on the number of monsters you recruit. Speaking of, let's acknowledge that facet. The only side activity in Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is the monster arenas. This feature should be immensely familiar to franchise fans, including those of the most recent release Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. Its execution even echoes the latter. As mentioned earlier, exploring can sometimes reveal recruitable monsters, and these creatures can be formed into parties of 3 to battle teams of 3 in the arena. However, discovering these monsters requires you to take advantage of the game's day and night cycle, which, besides progressing gradually, can be shifted manually by using a specific spell or resting at inns. Some recruitable foes only appear at night, and townspeople may even hint at particular locations, so speaking to the handful of NPCs in each city and village is always worthwhile. One of the most overlooked features in this entry will likely be recall, which is the ability to memorize lines you deem essential for future endeavors. It's a rather handy tool for optional objectives and tasks, notably for hidden areas on the world map and discoverable monsters. It is a bit too easy to activate this accidentally with one of the face buttons though, so a stricter activation method such as multiple button presses or holding one down would have been more ideal. Still, this more manual take on adventuring delightfully contrasts with the hand-holding objective markers for the main story, ensuring that those seeking a less on-rails type of progression may get their fix. Okay, but let's return to the monster arenas for a second. There are a handful scattered around certain towns, and matches are separated by ranks. The battles themselves run entirely on auto, with you only able to adjust each monster's general AI behaviors, so there is an element of randomness. Still, you can win easily by using monsters recruited from the endgame, so the difficulty becomes somewhat moot. Furthermore, it's a bit odd how much money you gain from winning these arena matches, especially since they can be repeated. So if you're near the end of the game and need funds, spamming the arena with maximum battle speed can swiftly remedy your concerns. In summary, I enjoyed these bouts, but the vast element of choice regarding which monsters to use felt largely unnecessary. On the other hand, the impact of this recruitment boosting the capabilities of my Monster Wrangler was appreciated, providing more motivation for these discovery milestones. Then again, that only works if you're using Monster Wrangler at all. Circling back to the standard combat, the basics of Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake can be understood in a matter of minutes. At the start of each turn, you can choose which actions each party member should perform, or let the AI-directed behaviors guide them. And the order of actions depend on the highest speed stats between your characters and the opposing forces. The only other notable factors include spells and character-specific techniques, but if you've played literally any other RPG before, none of this will feel even remotely new to you. This simplicity can be refreshing, yet, as noted earlier, with the frustration of the overly rapid encounter rate, the excitement of combat wears thin in the later hours. The only significant alterations you can make are job changes at an area known as the All Trades Abbey. Here, any party member except the protagonist can change to any job you desire, reverting to level 1. However, they keep half of their stats and all learned skills from the previous job, making it a genuinely thought-provoking dilemma. The main cost of this decision is whether you're okay with the prospect of grinding your affected characters back to the appropriate level. However, it's worth remembering that you don't need to use the job changes feature at all, and you can just stick with the initial ones. I'd say only the hard difficulty, which is Draconian Quest, highly benefits from the job change feature in an incredibly noticeable way. Yet considering how you earn less currency and experience in this mode, I don't recommend trying that mode to begin with. On a personal level, the lack of necessity of the systems helped make it more rewarding, since the benefits can make clear differences in character builds and strategies. There is a delicate balance here for casual players to stick with what's given to them and get by, while the more invested and experienced players can see their efforts pay off. Moreover, you can alter a character's personality based on findable books, influencing stat growth, but this also isn't a factor you need to acknowledge unless you're on Draconian Quest. A notable retained element from previous versions of Dragon Quest III is the mini medals, essentially unique collectibles you can redeem at a starting town for beneficial equipment. Fans should know that the locations of some of these medals have been changed, since a decent number have been moved to secret areas on the world map. In that way too, this adventure can feel more stimulating rather than only retreading familiar ground. Lastly, we gotta mention the soundtrack of Dragon Quest III has also been given a facelift, and it thrives unabashedly. The world map theme is particularly gratifying, never failing to inspire wonder no matter how often I hear it. Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is an appreciated, quality revisit to one of gaming's cornerstones, bolstered by modern conveniences, an outstanding presentation, and new events and battles. This is undoubtedly the definitive edition of Dragon Quest III, and it is a must-play for fans, but it's certainly not going to be for everyone. The faithfulness of this approach has helped keep the game's identity intact, but at the cost of potentially alienating prospective newcomers due to the classically styled encounter rate and lack of character and narrative motivations. Still, with all that said, even amidst my frustrations now and then, I had an absolute blast with Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the first two Dragon Quest games are approached in their HD-2D Remake forms. Noisy Pixel is giving Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake an 8 out of 10. Thanks for watching. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers providing independent gaming coverage through news, reviews, previews, and more. Check out our Patreon to help support our continued growth, and subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.